Our last lecture for the semester is all about how to create the illusion of motion in two-dimensional art. How do you make it look like things are moving? It is important to note that there are ways in which we could have art that actually moves. You could build a little motor on your photograph and have it slowly rotate. Please don't. You could also create a film or video that functions as two-dimensional art, and because of the persistence of vision, will make it look like it's moving. What we're going to do is focus on those aspects of how we create a sense of motion on a flat, static, two-dimensional surface. And we're going to go through these pretty quickly because the techniques are relatively straightforward and ones with which you're familiar, even if we haven't already named them. First of which is diagonals. So any diagonal not only gives us a sense of depth, like we talked about when we were talking about the illusion of depth, but it also gives a sense of motion because of the way in which I move back in space, or at least I project myself as a viewer into the scene and make it feel like I'm moving back in space. So when we look at the corner of the gas station that extends off into the horizon line, I feel like I'm moving backwards. Part of the reason that a diagonal is going to convey a sense of motion is that really any line is going to convey a sense of motion. A line is definitionally a point in motion. We also talked briefly last time about how rhythm can often convey a sense of motion. We build up a sense of anticipation as we rise and fall, as we move across the surface of the undulating form or whatever it is that is creating our rhythm. So we've got line and we've also got rhythm. There's a special kind of line that we call lines of force, and those are basically the kinds of lines that show the directions of the explosions of shrapnel, or even the line that's coming out of the rocket that originally was shot by the pilot. So we are relying in a lot of ways on comic book conventions. We're using these lines to indicate how things are moving around. Another aspect of the way in which we can create a sense of things that are moving is relying on what's called kinesthetic empathy. Basically, the idea here is that you spend almost your whole life trapped in a human body, and you know how human bodies work. And therefore, if you see an image of a human body in a pose that is not sustainable, it looks like it's about to fall, you have a sense of anticipated motion. You know not only that they had to move to get into that position, but that they can't hold that position, and therefore we anticipate that they will move because of our kinesthetic empathy, because we feel that we know how things move in the world. If you're curious as to how Robert Longo created these works back in the 1980s and then continued them into the 1990s, he made his friends follow him up to the roof of his building in New York City, and his assistant took photographs while he pelted his friends with oranges, and then he made drawings based on those photographs. So, torture your friends for art. Kinesthetic empathy applies to non-human bodies as well. I understand that horses don't spend all of their time walking around on their hind legs, so I have a sense of anticipated motion. Eventually the horse will lower its legs, and I also understand that it had to move to get into that position. We also can have kinesthetic empathy towards even things like runs of paint. I understand how, if I were to take really liquid paint and pour it onto a canvas and then tilt the canvas so that the paint spills, I would get a sense of motion because of my anticipation and my understanding, my empathy for the way in which things move through the world.